it comes down to America. There is a gap between where people need to be, and there's a gap in financial literacy. If you look at the data, it's like 42% of Americans are not saving money for retirement. And I think by some measure, it's like 66% of people have little to no retirement savings. So there's a problem there.
Podcast Junkies, episode 174. I am in Yonkers, New York. I'm on the road again in my parents' house. For those of you that are new to the show, you may not know that I was raised in Yonkers. For those of you that are long-time listeners, you'll know that I've recorded a couple of intros from this same room. It's actually not the room. Well, it was a room I did share with my brother at one point. So I did sleep in here for a bit, and then eventually I graduated and got my own room. But it's always fun to be back home and get some memories of the life you used to lead. So get to spend some time on the East Coast here, and then going to go into the city for some meetings. I'm here after having spent a week in podcast movement in Philly. Year 5 in the books. It was a total whirlwind. And looking back, there's so many things I wish I had done in terms of reaching out to folks and spending more time with new connections. But when you see so many old friends, your natural instinct is to spend time with them. And that's what happened this year. Karaoke night, including that in the mix. It's always a good time. And it's just a nice reminder of the relationships I've built over the years. And so bittersweet when you're leaving, and always looking forward to next year. I'm actually looking forward to hanging out back in Philly in MapCon in early September, and PodFest in March, in February. So actually I'm going to be in another conference in Australia at We Are Podcast, and that's going to be in October. So lots of podcast related events. Going to try to make it to DC PodFest in November to support my friend Jennifer Crawford. And as you might imagine, lots of podcast related activities, including connections I made there, new folks doing interesting things. And it's not going to be one of those recaps of everything I learned at Podcast Movement, but I thought it should mention it, given that it's fresh and top of my mind. And it's why I'm on the East Coast, part of the reason why I'm on the East Coast now. So in case you missed last week's episode, we spoke to Barney Waters, host of CEOs Wear Sneakers. And it's a fascinating journey from him in terms of how he got into the sneaker culture and the good things he's doing in partnering with the folks, the likes of Gary Vaynerchuk, aka Gary V, and this idea of entrepreneurs being the new celebrities, which I thought was fascinating. So you'll enjoy that, episode 173. And this week we speak to Andy Wang. Andy Wang is host of Inspired Money. I actually got to see Andy in passing a couple of times at Podcast Movement, and we never got to sit down and actually have a conversation in person. But in order to make up for that, we present this week's episode. We talk about how Andy prepared to have Zak Penn, the screenwriter of Ready Player One, on his podcast, which I thought was fascinating. What opened the door for Andy to start his own podcast? How he learned to play the slack-keyed guitar from a legend, Raymond Kāne. Kāne. I knew I was going to mess that up as soon as I saw it in print. So hopefully one of those are correct, and someone can definitely correct me. Why he chose the title of his podcast and why making the world a better place is so important for him. We talk about the surprisingly varied guests that Andy has had on his show and what excites him about the future of his podcast. As always, full show notes available at podcastjunkies.com/174. So no sponsors this week. I just want you to get straight into the episode. It's been a couple of days since I've had one come out, so I thought I'd let you get straight to it. So enjoy my conversation with Andy. So Andy Wang, host of Inspired Money, thank you for joining us on Podcast Junkies.
Thank you, Harry. It's so great to be here.
It's the requisite origin story every time I have a guest, because at this point, my listeners know I never know where I'm going to find my next guest, because a lot of them happen in conferences, as you might imagine. If you have a show about podcasting, and you go to a podcasting conference, people come up to you and like, well, I should be on your show. And I don't know that I have a hard and fast rule. Like we were discussing pre-show about how I pick people, but I think I now just follow my gut and I go with my instinct, and I saw what you were doing. You posted something about a way you're testing out the new audiogram features. I think was it from Headliner, right?
Yeah, it was a Headliner, Spearman.
Yes.
I've tried a couple of them, but yeah.
And what I loved is it was based off of your interview of the of Zak Penn, the director of Ready Player One, and it looked like you put a little bit of time into it. It's not one of those like just pick the standard options and then auto generate. You thought about what you wanted to do, so I was like, well, this guy is either really loves the movie or is that combination of just because podcasters have that combination of just like interest in their topic, but then there's just that geek love of technology aspect of it. So I imagine it's a mix of it. So maybe we can start there and tell you what you're thinking as you're putting that together.
Well, I will confess to you, Harry, I still have not seen the movie yet.
I haven't either.
I think it's just a case of me going down the rabbit hole on that one. I was super excited to have Zak Penn on as a guest. I did the research, the prerequisite research, trying to understand Ernie Klein's book, which I haven't read yet either. I have a long list of things to do. I was just super excited to have him on the podcast and to interview him about screenwriting and his experience, his unique experience, having been a very young guy who moved out to Hollywood right after college and really quickly sold a screenplay, I think within a year. So inside of a year, he and his writing partner sold their screenplay. And he's just had this 25-year successful career. And I mean, you're out in LA. I'm sure that you know a lot of aspiring screenwriters and actors. Not everybody's path goes that way. So
they'd like it to.
They would like it to. But it's tough out there. It's a tough business. And some of that came through in the interview. But because of that, I got really excited about, how can I let people know that this exists? And I'm still struggling with that, trying to figure out how to do that better. But audiograms is one way that I've tried. And I guess because in the spirit of this Steven Spielberg movie, I kind of got carried away with the audiogram. I'm like, how can I started feeling like I was creating a movie out of this, 60-second audiogram, but I had fun with it. And I think that's just part of the experience. The whole podcasting experience is very experimental for me. A good creative outlet, I think, in many ways. The audiogram is just one example of that.
I get that, because podcasters are creators, and so when they find tools that help them, tap into that creativity, I've had the same experience with tools like audiogram and just sitting there. There's something, even the editing in the beginning, I don't do a lot of it now because I have a business now that does that, and we do that for our clients and we work with editors. But I remember in the beginning, there was something therapeutic about editing my own episode, and I long for the days when I had the hours to just sit there and edit episodes. It was just fun. And so sometimes these little tools come up to make our lives easier to share, because it's such a challenge. We wear so many hats as new podcasters. We have to be the producer, we have to be the audio engineer, we have to be the web guy, we have to be the marketer, we have to be the social media person. We have to go out in person and just tell so many people about it. It's a lot of work to get people to notice with so many. I think the latest numbers, 350,000 podcasts in the Apple ecosystem.
It is a lot. That is the nature of being a showrunner. You wear many hats. And right now I'm doing everything from having conceptualized the show to booking guests to the editing. I mean, you're right. That is a creative outlet. Sometimes it's like a masochistic one, I think, because it's so time consuming. But, it is what it is. You can choose to, you can choose how much time you're going to spend on it.
Yes. When did you realize that it was, you must have started listening to podcasts and I'm wondering how long before you thought about starting your own?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about the timeline, but like many people, my podcast listening adventure started with Serial, and that kind of opened the doors to listening to all kinds of other shows, whether it's business development or marketing, how to grow one's business, since I'm part of a family-owned business. And then I have a hobby of playing music too. So I listen to songwriting podcasts, really just trying to learn all the time, whatever that may be.
Have you listened to Song Exploder?
You're the second person who asked me that in the last week. The answer is no, but
Okay.
I need to check it out desperately. I listened to these two guys out of Liverpool, Soda Jerker podcast.
Okay.
They sit down and really dissect people's songwriting technique, and it's so individualistic. So it's really interesting to hear how people have come up with their hit songs. And, there's similarities, but it's different too.
So you were talking about these songs, and there's a show, this NPR show, and I wish I could remember it, but it's along those lines of like untold stories in music, and they were talking about the one of these Louie Louie they were talking about the song Louie Louie and how they totally butchered it. It was actually a cover because the original was done by someone who didn't become famous, but the one that became famous and the one that's in Animal House. And they were talking about that they did a take, and if you listen to it, there's actually like a curse in it because they screwed up, and it was like that's the one that they published with. But I like those types of stories as well, sort of like these behind the scenes stories that, and it sounds like you relate a lot to from a music perspective. What type of music do you play?
I play Hawaiian music. I've played many different styles of music back in college, which is further and further away. It was like 24 years ago. I was playing like in a punk hardcore ska band.
Wow.
And then I tell people that I got old. And in middle age, I am now playing acoustic Hawaiian slack key guitar.
Slacky?
Yeah, slack key guitar. So this is music that dates back to the mid to late 1800s. The Hawaiian Islands did not have, stringed instruments originally. Mm-hmm. The ukulele, that it's very well known, was imported from Portugal. And the, 6-string steel guitar or even nylon string guitar came from California. The Mexican cowboys brought them to Hawaii to teach the locals how to herd cattle. So this is cowboy music and, really folk music, some Hawaiian lyrics, and, beautiful acoustic guitar tradition. What's your connection to Hawaii? My wife was born and raised there. Okay. So that's a big part. My first time out there, I think I was 15 or 16 years old. And it's just such a special place. I mean, the scenery, you have ocean, you have mountains. The weather is always amazing. It's like 70 to 80 degrees every day, year round. And my mom's side of the family, she has some cousins there too. So we have some connections. But through many, many trips, especially visiting my wife's family, my mother-in-law is there, really fell in love with the music and have been fortunate enough to spend some time with some of the Hawaiian guitar masters too. Like so many indigenous cultures, there's a situation where a lot of the culture was throughout time, like nearly lost, or different traditions were, not allowed to be practiced. So the locals who carry on those cultural traditions, they're very generous to those who want to learn because they want to perpetuate that art form and keep the culture alive. So yeah, some crazy adventures. It's very different from if I loved Eric Clapton. Like the odds of me seeking Eric Clapton out and like going to his house are very, very small. But, in a sort of smaller folk tradition, it does happen. Like, I think my first live show, I was living in Boston and saw these three guys, Raymond Kāne, Keola Beamer, and George Kahumoku Jr. And these are three, masters of the art form. Mm-hmm. And I got to see them play. And then years later, I sent a letter to Raymond Kāne because he had his address in his CD liner notes. And I just wrote him a letter saying, "Dear Mr. Kāne, I'm going to be in Honolulu these dates. Would love..." Well, actually, you know what I asked him? I asked him, "Are you performing anywhere? Because I saw you perform in Boston. I would love to see you perform again." Didn't really expect to hear back from him, but totally forgot about it by the time I actually flew with my wife into the airport in Honolulu, and my sister-in-law picked us up. And we're just sitting in the back seat, and she says to me, "Andy, you got a phone call earlier today. Raymond Kāne called." And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "Yeah." And I thought that he was a telemarketer when he asked, "Is Andy there?" So I said no, and I hung up the phone. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, you hung up the phone on Raymond Kāne. He's like a he's like a legendary Hawaiian slack key guitar player.
Oh my God.
And she says, he immediately called back, this is Raymond Kāne. Is Andy Wang there? And she said, he's not in yet. So that was the beginning of me going out to the other side of the island for guitar lessons, I think for $25 an hour. And, just hanging out with this guy. And it was incredible. The reason for that was that he suffered from, he had like a breathing problem because he was also a welder in his younger years. So he told me he was not performing anywhere because he couldn't handle smoke. Like he couldn't handle playing in the bars and there being smoke in the air. So he just really wasn't performing publicly very much. But he said, oh, do you want to come out to my house? And I said, hell yeah, sure.
Wow. And so is he still alive?
He is not alive. He is passed on. But yeah, I think it was mid to late 90s, probably for about 5 or 6 years, that every time I went back to Honolulu, I'd drive out to his place and spend some time with him and his wife. And then inevitably leave with like some CDs and books or something. Even if I had them already, I'd be like, sure, I'll get another CD and I'll give them away as gifts.
Yeah, you really can't say no to Raymond Kāne when he's with anything he offers, I would imagine, especially if you're a fan. Yeah.
Yeah. And I tell people it was like one part guitar lesson. And the second part was a real lesson in aloha, in like, the aloha spirit, this generosity. Aloha means hello, goodbye, and love all in one word. So, it was really special to spend some time with them and feel so welcomed in their home.
I get the sense that experience affected you or made you see those types of relationships in a different way. And I'm wondering if it's colored how you live your life or it's colored how you interact with people who may now be fans of your work, right? And you kind of think of that in a way as you grow. And we can always teach people because we always think we have nothing to teach. But when we realize we've been doing something for, whether it's the guitar, whether it's podcasting, whether it's building a business, at some point, there's a shift that happens and people start coming to you. And I think when we've been blessed to have experiences like that with mentors or people we admire, I think a lot of that rubs off on us.
Yeah, it's really impressed upon me two things. One is that during one of my initial visits to Raymond Kāne's house, I told him that I had seen him perform in Boston, and that was probably 5 years before I had actually visited him and met him in person. And he asked me, he said, oh, that's great. Did you come up to me after the show? And I said, no. And he said, why not? I said, well, one, I didn't know that I could do that. And two, it just didn't dawn on me that I should go talk to him. It sort of brought down this wall for me. Like, why should there be this separation between the audience and the stage? It's really not as high a wall as we think it is sometimes. Like, the artists do want to hear from their fans and the people who enjoy their music, and that I shouldn't have this sort of self-imposed extra barrier feeling that I can't even talk to them after the show. I think the second thing is that just learning music as a hobby, and it's just really taught me about trusting a process and embracing the process, because when you're learning, like you said, it goes back to, you really don't feel like you're an expert, but over time, you just keep at it and you are making progress. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it because the learning is gradual. Sometimes you're moving up, sometimes you regress and you go down, and sometimes it's just sideways and flat. Because of that cyclicality, oftentimes you don't see the progress that you're making. And if you look at yourself point A to point B, like over a 5-year period or 10-year period, you say, okay, I definitely have made progress. Yeah, for me, that was huge because I started playing this music just because I enjoyed the music. I found it inspirational. The Hawaiian tradition is really cool because there's a culture there that's being represented. So even whether I'm singing Hawaiian lyrics or playing an instrumental song, there are usually words, even if it's just an instrumental, but there are words associated to that song that carry meaning, continue stories and legends. And I think that process has had big impact on my life because I never planned to play this music outside of my living room. I had the worst stage fright ever. I would feel sick to my stomach, my hands would shake. And this is a finger style tradition. So if your fingers are shaking and your hands are shaking, you really can't play very well. It's not like I have a pick and I'm just strumming really hard like I did playing in college. This is a more delicate style. So I never thought that I'd play in front of everybody, and things have changed. So it taught me to embrace doing things that scare you. You know, you really can grow from those experiences.
Was podcasting one of those things for you?
The answer is yes. It's weird because I was listening to podcasts, right? I was listening to Serial. I was listening to, I guess, a lot of the NPR podcasts and then some of the Gimlet Media podcasts. They were coming around at that time.
Startup was awesome. Yeah.
And I don't know why. One day I decided I enjoy like listening to podcasts and the media so much. The fact that it's on demand and you can listen and it's very intimate experience to the listener. And I thought, I think I can create a show. I think it was Amy Jo Martin has a podcast called Why Not Now. I was listening to her show where she really tries to dissect these moments of her guests. Why not now? It's like these pivotal moments when you had this realization or you're ready to embark on something, but it's about the action, you know, whereas you may spend a lot of time thinking about doing something. And she's trying to really isolate what was that moment when you take the leap. And that sort of gave me the extra push to say, I think that I can create a podcast. I would like to give it a try. And then listening to her show, I said, all right, I think she challenged her listeners, you know, why not now? Pick something that you're going to give the go ahead and take the leap. So yeah, for me, podcasting was that. I wanted to give it a go, and so far so good.
Something you mentioned, I think, in your tagline as you're introing your episodes is this idea of inspired money. So I want to ask you about the title because that's not two things that maybe two words that usually go together. And then the other thing that caught my ear was this idea of making the world a better place. And I'm wondering why that's important for you.
By day, I am a financial advisor. That is the family business that I mentioned earlier. Yeah, we have a registered investment advisory firm. My father started the company. I've been here. This is my 20th year. And my younger brother is also here. So we're in the business of helping people to plan for retirement and manage their money. Inspired money, I thought that it comes down to America. There is a gap between where people need to be, and there's a gap in financial literacy. If you look at the data, it's like 42% of Americans are not saving money for retirement. And I think by some measure, it's like 66% of people have little to no retirement savings. So there's a problem there. In trying to come up with a podcast, I was trying to think about how can I make money a more interesting subject? And how can it be presented in a way that it's more compelling, more interesting? And they always say that podcasts should either be entertaining, educational, or inspiring. I think that inspired money is potentially could be all three of those, hopefully all of the above. And I think by featuring guests who have inspiring money stories, either they're building a business or they're giving money away to help people. There are all different ways of looking at money and of using money. So one of my goals is to try to shift listeners' perspectives on money, and hopefully also inspire them to think about money and to talk about money, because that's sort of half the battle. I think when it comes to personal finance, it's not that complicated. It's not that complicated a thing. We make it complicated, all too often because we're busy in our lives, responding to emails and paying bills and doing the things that we need to do. We just don't think about or talk about money enough. All too often, it's just a subject that's neglected. And I think that by having inspiring stories, talking about money mindset, and really trying to explore inspiring stories related to money, it just gets people thinking and hopefully in a positive light.
What's been the feedback over the time you've been doing the show?
So far, so good. I mean, I think feedback is good because people, one, they're just surprised that they listen and they're like, oh, wow, you actually have interesting guests. And I say, all right, well, thank you. I don't know if I should be insulted or not.
Well, you do mix it up because, I mean, you have Zak Penn on, who normally people wouldn't think of as a guest on a podcast about, financial literacy. And I love the fact that you just keep mixing it up. You've had people from like Broadway entrepreneurs and just a whole mix of, and I'm wondering if you could talk through this, because I think new podcasters feel like they need to follow a formula. And if it's going to be a podcast about money, well, I need to have all these financial experts on, and we can talk about budgeting and retirement plans and all these other acronyms and Seths and Roths and all this stuff that just makes people's heads spin. But it seems like you took a different approach, and maybe you're scratching your own itch at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, we started our conversation talking about Hawaiian slacky guitar, me not wanting to perform in public. Yeah, I guess it's multifaceted. I like to do a lot of different things. But as far as the podcast goes, I think that's the fun of it, right? That there's variety, that there's diversity, talking to different people. There's a reason why there's the phrase that, money's what makes the world go round. Like it or not, it's something that is part of our lives, and we need money to feed ourselves and clothe ourselves and put a roof over our heads. It's something that we all have to deal with, even Zak Penn. It's really cool to be able to talk to, such a diverse group of people. I mean, I enjoy talking to like creatives. I've talked to musicians and the screenwriter in Zak's case. I've talked to the Broadway entrepreneur. And then business people, right? I talked to the CEO and founder of the Maui Brewing Company, who was, I think, last year's Small Business Administration Business of the Year.
Wow.
So it's just cool talking to people who are either building something. And then on the flip side of that, I've talked to like executive directors of nonprofits, or I talked to Gret Glyer, who's a really young guy who started... he created an app so that people can download an app to their smartphone and then donate money to third world countries like Africa. He had spent time in Malawi, one of the poorest places in the world. And he saw that just like a small amount of money can make such a huge impact on children's lives and people's lives there. So he created an app, and it's really cool because you can see like there are people on the other side. So almost like caseworkers, where they're uploading a case where a young girl needs a medical procedure or a little boy needs a wheelchair. And, I can be sitting here in New Jersey, find on the app, oh, this little boy needs a wheelchair. I'll donate specifically to that need. And then they'll take my donation, get the wheelchair, and then send me a video back of the boy receiving the wheelchair. And it just connecting people. It's just cool seeing all these different ways that money impact our lives, and the positive things that are being done.
Make sure you send me a link to that, either that episode or that and the app, so we can put those in the show notes.
Yeah, happy to do that. And then I think that the other thing about money is that some of the themes that we're exploring are that money doesn't necessarily buy happiness. What are the other dimensions to money, right? Like exploring purpose and meaning and what does bring people fulfillment. There's a relation to money, but oftentimes money is not at the forefront. It's sort of a byproduct.
Can you talk about what was your inspiration as you were putting the format of the show together? I noticed that you have you play a listener question when you're during Zak's interview, and you also have a tip of the week.
Yeah, Harry, it is all a grand experiment. sometimes I don't know what the heck I'm doing, but I'm willing to try different things. The listener question was the first time that I ever did that. The money tip is a relatively new thing, but something that I added, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 episodes ago. And I just thought that it was sort of a nice complement to, I'm interviewing a guest and trying to explore what is their unique path, what are their unique views on money, how do they define success. And by sticking a money tip in the middle, I think that it's a nice contrast. It's like a short but sweet, actionable tip that the listener can take away, in addition to hopefully some takeaways that come out of the conversation with the guest.
I didn't get the sense that it was intrusive, so I'm assuming you do that all in post-production.
The money tip?
The tip and the listener question, you actually mentioned it in the interview, so you had that handy. But is the money tip post-production?
Yeah, the money tip is post-production.
Yeah.
I sort of, I break the interview into Act 1, Act 2, and I stick the money tip in the middle.
That's interesting because that's obviously, a lot of the folks we work with as clients, they have a podcast as an extension of their content marketing and they want to use it to build business. And so I think when we're getting started, new podcasters are always trying to figure out, is there a way that I can monetize the podcast or I can tie it into what I do? And I think having that tip of the week is almost like your little mid-roll ad, but in a way that's providing value and not just inserting something and you tying it into the content of the episode. So I think it works together wonderfully.
I'm trying. Well, thank you. Thank you. Someone who has a much bigger and, a long-running popular financial podcast whose opinion I trust. He told me one time, he said, you know what? I really like your show, but it's a little bit of a misnomer. It could just be called Inspired. It doesn't have to be Inspired Money. But I told him that, I do want to tie it back to my day job. Yeah, the money tip is like the Runnymede money tip of the week. My company is Runnymede Capital Management. I want the two to be linked together. The podcast is a deliberate part of our content marketing effort. I mean, we started like a company blog about 4 years ago, and we write articles there. And like I said, because I enjoy the podcasting medium, I thought it'd be a great way just to sort of a different way for our brand to get our company name out and engage listeners. I was kind of curious, is there a way to sort of cross-promote between podcast audience and blog audience and hopefully grow the two together? It's all, like I said, it's all an experiment, and I'm enjoying the process, and we'll see where it goes.
Talk to me a little bit about, did you have discussions with your business partners, which are your family? It's a family-owned business. So did you talk to them about what you were trying, or you just started the podcast on your own and then found a way to marry them together down the road?
It's a little bit of both. I think in the planning stage, I explained to them what my thoughts were, what my intentions were, what I wanted to try to accomplish. And I think my father really had no idea what I was talking about. My brother understood. And he listens to some podcasts, interestingly, different podcasts from what I listen to usually. Yeah, so he was aware. And so once I started it, I think that I pretty much conceptualized the idea of the show on my own, figured out what I wanted to do. Who I talk to is sort of partially in my control, and a lot of it is not. Like, you don't know who's going to accept the invitation. But I think as far as the company was concerned, they understood what my motivation was and what I wanted to accomplish. So there was no resistance there. And I did have enough planning ahead of time. I think that the pieces were all there. It wasn't a case of trying to fit it in after the fact. The planning process, it was thought out enough that, how will the podcast fit together with the blog? I think they're different, but there's enough of a connection that, for the two to appear on the same website is not like too crazy.
So it's interesting because I know a lot of podcasters, I think maybe think when they're getting started that they'll start a blog, but then it ends up being like the show notes end up being their blog because
no one has enough time.
Exactly.
That's what I'm finding. Even just publishing on a weekly schedule it can be grueling sometimes.
Oh yeah.
The next week comes much quicker than I wish that it did. I mean, I have a family too. I have 3 young kids, and I confess that I publish every Tuesday at 6 a.m. I've had a number of late Monday nights.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of podcasters listening can relate to that, especially in the beginning when you feel like you've made that public commitment. Confessed myself on my show that I try to be consistent, but then I'm building a business. I do some traveling, and sometimes real life takes over, and I just let them know in the next episode, hey, sorry, it's been a week or missed last week or something like that. But just as long as you maintain that open line with your listeners and just let them know real life sometimes takes over, I think they appreciate that.
Well, one of the best pieces of advice that I got before launching the show officially, I talked to a few friends, one buddy of mine who has, I think he had over 500 episodes published.
Wow.
He has a Hawaiian music podcast. It's the Hawaiian Music Concert Guide. I asked him, I said, hey, his name's Pico. I said, Pico, you have any advice for me? I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And he and I got on the phone, and he said, it's a long game. You have to commit to a publishing schedule and commit to doing it for a year before you even consider stopping. Because only then can you try to assess, like, where are you? Are you enjoying it? Are you not enjoying it? Is your audience growing? I committed that much. I want to try to get an episode out every Tuesday. I started on Mondays, but realized that I need the extra day after the week.
Oh yeah.
Tuesday mornings, perfect for me. I'd like to get 52 episodes out in a year's time. Then I can reassess. But I got to tell you, Harry, I have some work to do because I will be traveling some this summer. I need to get my backlog. I need to increase my pipeline. Otherwise, I'm gonna have some problems.
Have you had a slack key guitarist on your show?
I've had 2.
Okay, cool.
Episode 1 was Kimo West, who is a slack key guitarist, but he's actually better known as the longtime guitarist of Weird Al Yankovic's band. He's been a member of the band for, I think, over 25 years. I'm a big fan of his because, like most of the late night TV show musicians, these are the best musicians in the world because they have to be able to play any style. It doesn't matter. This guy Kimo, he has to be able to play Van Halen guitar solos in the music of Beat It when Weird Al is singing Eat It.
That's funny.
And then there's Lady Gaga, right? He's got to be able to play Madonna. He has to play all styles of music. So he's just a fantastic musician. And then there's another musician from the big island of Hawaii, and his name's LT Smooth. His background's super interesting because he grew up as a gangbanger, really a drug dealer as a kid in New Zealand, and really turned his life around, I think, after high school. And now he is a musician. He's dedicated to helping children. He visits prisons because he understands, what that, given his past experience and the hardships that he had in his life, he connects with the kids who are incarcerated. And really an inspiring story because the CEO of Salesforce is a big fan of his. So it gives him opportunities. I think he's performed at Salesforce's big conference every year. Maybe not every year, but he's performed there. And he's also performed with U2's Bono and some really big superstars in Davos in Switzerland because of the connection with Salesforce.
It's so fun because I'm sure those hold a special place. Those conversations hold a special place in your heart because since that's an instrument that you play, that you're a fan of, and that you know the history, you feel like you can just go deep with those conversations.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm certainly a fan. I mean, it's always fun to, as a fanboy, to be interviewing people that you look up to and admire.
As you think about, I mean, it sounds like you're, the sky's the limit in terms of the types of guests because you had, if you had the screenwriter on from Ready Player One, was that something that you just was a cold outreach, or is just, again, is it just another case of you scratching your own itch and you're like, oh, this guy seems interesting, I want to talk to him?
With him, it's like a friend of a friend.
Okay.
Like you. I didn't know him. I sort of knew him before, but not super well. Having a podcast does give you a platform, as you know, to talk to all kinds of interesting people that probably would not have talked to me otherwise.
Well, it's so funny the way it works, because if you hadn't had that connection to that friend, then you wouldn't have interviewed him, which wouldn't have inspired you to create an audiogram to what Steven Spielberg would have created, which wouldn't have caught my eye, which would have resulted in us never having met.
Right. So you just follow the series of, you just follow the breadcrumbs.
Yeah. And that stuff fascinates me. I love that when I start thinking about that stuff. So what has got you excited as you think about the future of the show and where you want to take it? And I know you said it's a grand experiment, but are there things that you still want to try and dream guests you have on your list?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that Tina Fey there's a quote that I love. The fun is always on the other side of yes. It goes back to me never wanting to play music outside of my living room. Like, I was so comfortable there. But what ended up happening is that there aren't that many people playing Hawaiian music in the New York tri-state area. There are only a handful of us. So because of that, I get invited on these like crazy adventures. I think about them now and they're unbelievable. I'll give you two examples. One, I was driving to work one day and my cell phone rang. I didn't recognize the phone number. And for some reason, I decided to answer that day. The voice on the other side of the line said, This is Christy Brinkley's assistant. We're looking for some Hawaiian music this Friday. Could you come out to, the Hamptons and play the special event? You fast forward, next thing I know, I'm playing this like tree dedication in the middle of town just for Christy Brinkley and her family. Her daughter Alexa Ray was there. That's Billy Joel's daughter. It was just like maybe eight or 10 of them. And then they invited me out to dinner afterwards. It was crazy.
Wow. That's a magical story there.
I have another one. I was down in Disney with my family. I think I went to a conference and, I have 3 kids. I think it was just my daughter that year, the oldest one. The other 2 weren't born yet. And my cell phone rang and I answered the phone. And there was a guy, he said, "We're looking for an ukulele player. Would you like to be in this movie?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure. I've never been." He's like, "It's an independent film. They don't have a big budget, but would you be interested in being in the film?" So I said, yes. The movie is called The Little Tin Man. Kay Cannon plays the female lead. She's actually more well known as a writer. She wrote for 30 Rock. She wrote the Pitch Perfect series of movies. Okay. Most recently, she directed the movie Blockers. So she's a big deal. And it's a really cute movie. I'm in there playing the ukulele dressed as Elvis. I mean, it's crazy, right? I mean, I'm the Chinese Elvis playing the ukulele in this little movie. But, the possibilities, you don't know where you're going to go. And I feel like the same is with the podcast. I mean, I want to grow the community. I want to grow the downloads like all of us do. But in the meantime, I'm just having a blast talking to different people. I've told both my father and my brother, I said, even if I had 0 listeners, I think it's still worth doing because I feel like I'm learning a tremendous amount just talking to the guests. And, to talk to some of these people for 40 to 60 minutes, I come away with it with takeaways. And I hope that listeners will join me for that journey because I'm enjoying it so much. I'm learning so much. I think that it's making me a better person. So I don't know where it's going to go, but it's just like with the music. I never planned to play outside of my living room. And then next thing I know, I'm having dinner with Christy Brinkley's family.
Amazing.
Anything can happen. You shoot for the stars, you settle for the moon. It's that kind of thing. I mean, you try to have plans, but you don't really know where it's going to go.
You're open to the possibilities. And I think when you put yourself in a position where you're like in the stream of where creativity is happening, naturally people are going to be drawn to that and find you. And they found you, because of your talents as a musician, and now because of a podcast, I'm sure that sort of thing is happening. And this interview is an example of that as well. So it's really fascinating, and it's one of the reasons I do the show, because I just love talking to people, and I just the fact that we have a shared love of podcasting is where we start, and then we just never know where it's going to go. And it's just always fascinating to be able to have these conversations with people from all over the world.
Definitely. I enjoyed your episode with Jordan Harbinger. And,
it's good
I
job.
see the parallels there too, because I know that Jordan does a lot of preparation for
Mhm.
every interview. And it's kind of like that. It's like you prepare like crazy, then you have to be flexible because you don't know where the conversation's going to go.
Yeah.
So you don't know
It's
what the
almost nice.
possibilities are going to be.
And it's nice to know that you have that preparation done. So if you need to lean on it, you can, but it's helpful for him. So just had a couple more questions as we wrap up. What's something you've changed your mind about recently?
Something that I changed my mind about. That's a really good question. Well, podcast related, what I go back and forth all the time is like one is format and two is length of the show. I'm
Yeah.
never really sure. And I've experimented with that a little bit. I mean, I've always been, since I started, I was comfortable with like 45 minutes, maybe an hour if things go long. I've been told when you solicit feedback, you hear like all the answers. I heard 15 minutes, I heard 30 minutes, I heard 60 minutes. So in the end, I sort of had to go back to where I started. I mean, I kind of agreed when people told me, all right, shorter's better, especially for a personal finance podcast, because people are kind of turned off by
Yeah.
by a business
Yeah.
podcast. It's not like talking about the Yeti
You
or
could
the Loch Ness
lately.
Monster or UFOs, which I'm a little bit envious of sometimes because it seems like if I talked about UFOs,
Oh yeah.
maybe I can grow
That's
my audience quicker. I'm not sure.
That's the Joe Rogan 3-hour podcast.
So I've kind of gone back and forth. So to answer your question, it's like I wanted to go shorter. I kind of tested it out. I'm kind of going back to where I think is the sweet spot, which is around 45 minutes, because I think that the extra amount of time just gives me a little bit more leeway to like dig a little bit more deeper and make the conversation more meaningful. I think in 30 minutes, it's just really short. And
It is. It's hard.
yeah, I think my questions would have to be super laser focused.
Yeah, you'll lose a lot in that structure because you feel like I got to get through the questions, and I've only got 30 minutes, and I get the sense that there's a rushed aspect to it. So
yeah, and then I go back and forth on editing too. It's like how much should I edit? Because I've done both. I've kind of experimented with. I've heard like some of the the NPR podcasts are highly edited, and for me to make even an attempt to do that is kind of insane because I'm doing it on my own, right? They have like a full staff. They have a full-time staff of people doing this. But I did listen to like Death, Sex, and Money. I really enjoy that show. So I've experimented a couple of times taking the interview and having a little bit more edited. I don't know. You do what time allows. I go back and forth. I mean, you want natural, I'm trying to find that happy medium between what makes sense. How much editing should there be? But at the end of the day, I think audience, right? You're thinking about the audience first. So whatever it is, whether it's highly edited or not, I want to deliver like the best program possible. You try to cut out the stuff that's not necessary and you keep the good stuff in. And best case scenario, you've edited and people don't even know that you edited.
Yeah.
Right. That's the magic. It's like, you want it to be on point. You want to get rid of any stuff that just doesn't belong. Yeah, hopefully if you've edited well, people don't even know. You always want it to sound natural, either way.
Totally. Yeah. No, what's the most misunderstood thing about you?
Most misunderstood. I think that we're always looking at ourselves. It's like, are you extroverted? Are you introverted? I think that we're all like ambiverts because it's hard to be one or the other. Everybody tends to be like a little bit of both. That's where it's hard to judge the book by the cover because you see someone speaking and talking a lot, which sometimes is my case. Certainly, my wife tells me, especially when you're trying to like leave someplace, whether you're trying to leave church or leave a party, and she's like, "You won't shut up. We got to get out of here." But I don't think I'm really extroverted because if I go to a conference, it's like, after spending the whole day trying to network and talk to different people, I'm exhausted. I mean, I do enjoy peace and quiet. So, it's like a little bit of both. But yeah, I think that not necessarily extroverted. Maybe we're all extroverted and introverted at the same time. We're all really confused is what it comes down to.
Situational is how I've heard it described as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, Andy, thank you so much for this time together. I'm glad I reached out. I had no idea where, as usual, these go, but it's fascinating to hear stories. And I know the listeners are going to get a kick out of it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
It's my pleasure to be on. It's so good to be among the guests on your show. And congratulations on 4+ years. And you're going to be hitting 200 episodes before you know it. So thank you for having me on. I'm just honored to be among such great company.
Well, I got the sense really quickly that you take a lot of pride in your show, and that came through in the way you're promoting it and the way you talk about it. And so I knew this was going to be a good conversation. So where's the best place for folks to track you down if they want to connect with you?
They can find me at inspiredmoney.fm or on Twitter at RunnyMeetCap. But yeah, go to inspiredmoney.fm and you can find me there. You can find out about my company, about the podcast, and about our blog.
Where can they hear your music?
That that is the question that is hard to answer. I don't have any recordings. I have a couple of songs that appear on friends' CDs. I'm actually going to be, the New York Botanical Garden has this Georgia O'Keeffe exhibit this whole spring going into the fall, and because of her time in Hawaii, she has paintings that were inspired by Hawaii, and the Botanical Garden has amazing programs set up, and I'll be there several times in June playing music.
So maybe you can get me those dates. We'll put those in the show notes as well.
Okay, we'll do. We'll do. Hey, look forward to seeing you.
Yeah. Thanks for the time. Hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
So thanks again to Andy for coming on the show, and it was nice to see him in person, at least to put a face to the name, even if it was only for a brief chat, I think, outside the hotel. We had a lot of fun at the conference, and I think we're going to have a chance to catch up afterwards. And I'm glad I had the chance to share his story with you. podcastjunkies.com/174. Intro and outro music composed by Cedar and Soil, cedarsoil.com. And don't forget to tune in next week for my conversation with Maurice Cherry, host of Revision Path. Also, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to receive my weekly updates, podcastjunkies.com/8tools. If you made it this far, you want the retention hashtag. I'm going to have a little fun with this one. And Andy will definitely appreciate it. We had a little bit of an email exchange, and in one of the emails, he said, "Hello, Jen," and I couldn't help but give him a little grief about that. So that was fun when we were trying to connect at Podcast Movement. So when he saw me in person, he said, "Hello, Jen." So he's got a good sense of humor as well. So he'll appreciate that the retention hashtag this week is Hello Jen, HELLOJEN, and his Twitter handle is Runnymede. It's his company, capital, so it's RUNNYMEDECAP. That's his Twitter handle. And tag him and tag podcast_junkies. Thanks for all you do to support the show. Thanks for your patience in getting this episode out and for putting up with the sound quality here. It's not a little less than what I'd like to put out there, but I think it's more important to get the content out, and the core of it is really good. So always testing new opportunities and new gear on the road. So I'll be trying a couple of different intros over the next couple of weeks. So let me know what you think. Have a fantastic day.